Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this special council meeting to order. So if I could have roll call, please.
Councilmember Mahan, Caserta, O'Neill,
Present.
Davis,
Here.
Watanabe, Kolstad,
Here.
and Mayor Gilmore.
Here. Is there a
Move excusal of Mahan.
motion second to move use
That's
to?
old school, honey. We're in new school now.
Hold on 1 second.
We doing old school or new school?
New school. Do you see it?
We
Mine's
see
not
it.
on.
We see it up there, but not the voting on the
It's
screen
coming.
yet.
Let's just start over. Nothing?
Do you want us to take
Okay,
a verbal vote?
That would be great. Thank
All those
you.
in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. That passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, the next item we have up is the Silicon Valley Power Strategic Plan update. We have our Director of Electric Utility here, John Rockema. Welcome.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm glad to be here today and talk to you a little bit about some very specific items and update you on our strategic planning process here. So we'll go over tell you where we are in the process, give you an overview of the strategic plan. I also want to talk a little bit about the load growth and system capacity, and there's been some questions on that. And talk to you a little bit about our expansion plans and infrastructure reinvestments. These things all tie together in strategies for the future here. I'll also talk a little bit about renewable resource procurement and a contract that we'll have coming forward to council here shortly. And then I wanted to talk about the City Hall complex and some space requirements. All of this ties back to having an effective working area and having effective processes, as we move forward here. So to overview our strategic plan, we started this process in January, and there's a lot changing out there in the world. There's a lot of technology changes and innovation. There's changing in the energy mix. And our customers are seeing this too, and so there's also workforce challenges out there. And these all drive change in the organization. So we engaged Navigant Consulting to go through a strategic planning process to us and go through a very rigorous process. And we got to start with identifying and integrating the views of all the various stakeholders. And I think all of you were interviewed. We've done a lot of interviews. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. We'll do internal and external environmental analysis, and then we're going to come around and start confirming, what is the vision and mission of the utility, and what are the values that we want to put forward to the community and our customers and our stakeholders. And then put together an implementation plan that is very specific and measurable as we can go forward. And then ensure that we got some ongoing communications and that this thing becomes dynamic and continues on and as we move to the future. So the first step in this was kind of to identify themes through these interviews that we've had. We asked people, what they thought of the current state of the utility, what they thought of the vision and the future state of the utility was, and just try to get an idea of what people thought. And we interviewed, some internal staff members in our internal steering committee and core team and other SVP staff. We obviously interviewed the council and the manager and their staff and other city departments as well as multiple customer groups. We had 4 different groups of customers. And there was, a series of themes that developed, out of these interviews, here. And as an example, almost everybody can really talk to the mission of providing safe, reliable, low-cost power to our customers with a high level of customer service, and everybody in the utility and almost all the stakeholders can talk about that as our mission. When you start thinking about the vision of what is the utility going to look like in the future, things get a little looser there. So there's obviously, we can work on those types of things. Other issues, and it came up, our customer relationships, I think, are very good, but they're reliant on, the personal interaction of the staff and the customers there. So there's things that we can do better in work processes and other areas, and this will tie back to some of the topics that we have as we go, further on. So we're going to work through these in the strategic plan. So now the next step that we're going through now is they did an external market scan, the consultants did, and kind of look outside. What is the market doing out there? What is changing in the world? Where are we going to be situated there? And then addressing the organizational readiness of our, organization. How ready are we to do this? And one of the next steps is going to be looking at our strengths and weaknesses and what are the opportunities and threats, that we have as we go forward. So, with this, in the assessments and in findings, there was a number of areas that, came up as areas we can look at. Certainly we have to look at our organization and see if it's modeled correctly as we look forward to these new changes. The idea of innovation is something that we need to kind of refocus on. As you get really busy trying to serve load, which we'll talk about a little bit, later, you kind of sometimes lose that edge on looking at those innovative ideas and going forward. And then making sure that we have good communications all the way up and down the line, both internally to SVP, up to you, to the council, and to the customers and the stakeholders. And in doing this, we can continuously improve our work processes and our management processes in here, and then make sure that we also take care of our people here and make sure that we have a good organizational system, to be able to accomplish these things. And then we got to measure the performance, in this, and make sure that we have the metrics that we can make sure that we are, high performing as an organization. So we're working through this process here. We've been through, identifying these emerging issues in the planning horizon. We're going to go into the readiness assessment, and then what we're going to do is we're going to put together, over the next couple of weeks, you're refining some straw man mission and vision statements and values, and then we'll come back to council, again, and get your input onto this, because this is a continuous process to make sure that we have the input from all the stakeholders as we go through this process. And then as we go forward, we'll define more specific implementation and performance plans, as well as making sure that we got a good communications plan and a way to monitor this, as we go forward. So just kind of transitioning, one of the areas that we have, one of the questions, as comes up is, got two cities here. One of them is Santa Clara on the left, the other is New York City on the right. So one of the questions is which city has a higher power demand per square mile than the utilities serving those two cities? You're right, Santa Clara does. And yes, that's right. I had to do this for the people from New York.
Ooh, right. I was wondering when you were going to come out with that one.
That's right. That's right.
No, I was waiting.
Yeah. So how much higher do you think it is? Actually, 50% higher as far as the density of power we supply in Santa Clara than Con Ed, who's the supplier of New York City. So I just throw that out there just to give you an idea of what we do and, what the basis of this utility is, as we go forward here. So, our load growth has been exceeding, 5% for the last, couple of years. I got a graph on this. We hit a system peak, this last summer at 586 megawatts. And we have continuous, new load coming on. We got 4 new substations in progress, in discussion moving forward. Of course, we have City Place with the Esperanza substation in there. But one thing I wanted to kind of emphasize here is kind of a basic business approach we've been doing, because, from my standpoint is I feel my job's to serve the load, coming in and give you guys the plan that it takes to serve it and let you know, there. And that's my role. But for new load, the process we've been using is any new load coming in, basically we try to make them pay for the upfront system improvements that are required to serve them. So we get that money up front from them. That makes sure that we're not stranding any assets if they go away and leaving our other customers responsible for those assets. Then the other thing to keep in mind too, as a basic business approach then, is what we sell the energy to them for is more than what it costs to serve them, the variable cost of buying that energy and providing it to them, plus a contribution back to the fixed costs of the utility, which benefits the other customers because you're spreading those fixed costs over a broader base. So it's just kind of a basic philosophy of moving forward in service. So I wanted to just go briefly just show historically what have we seen. And if you look at 2000 here, it kind of climbs, the curve goes up. That was the dot-com boom. In about 2001 or so, you had the dot-com bust. We lost about 8% of our load, during the dot-com bust there, about our sales. But we were just in the process of transitioning from high-tech manufacturing into data centers there. And so we were actually putting a lot of infrastructure in, and we had a lot of floor space. So then when things started to recover, we actually ramped up fairly fast. You'll see 2004 through 2006, 2007, we had a very high growth period in there. And then I became director and things flattened out. So about 2007. So you see some just more steady growth there into 2008, and then we hit the recession. And so we actually only lost about 3% of our load during the recession. Turns out, data centers actually are pretty, constant loads, aren't as dependent on some of those things than others. But we did lose about 3% of our load. Within about less than 18 months, we recovered that. And then you look at about 2014 there, all of a sudden, things just kind of shifted and took off. The load growth started increasing very rapidly, and it's been doing that for the last, probably 2 or 3 years here, and that's what we're seeing. So the question comes up: what are we projecting going forward here? So here's the blue part of the curve is the curve from the last one, and then you see the projections at the end. The red line is projections. If all the people who are in talking to us today, come and actually build their facilities and we serve them, is what that red line is. The green line is probably more realistic, a prediction of what things go. Predicting things will climb exponentially forever is always tough. There. So, it's what we're kind of looking at. Oh, and one thing you'll notice that from 2008 to 2018, we grew about 50% actually in those 10 years. If that red line hits, our loads would grow 100% in the next 10 years, which, is something that, you don't necessarily plan for, but here's the thing on that, and I'm switching now on the next slide to capacity. This is a system capacity that we have to actually serve that load. And so there's, with the three curves there, the thing is, if we don't stay ahead of, or don't have a plan to stay ahead of that red curve, then we're limiting the growth. Yeah, then that's, I just want to make sure that's, again, not my job to limit growth, you know, in the city. You know, it's a decision others make. You know, my job is to serve what comes into me and what you want me to serve here. So you'll notice that what we've done is we have a plan here that keeps us ahead of that red curve. You know, we were right around the 600 megawatt plus capacity there. We had a project in place. We actually just completed it a few weeks ago in one of our substations, completed the project that actually increases that capacity about 100 megawatts. Now what happens in these things is every time you fix a bottleneck in the system, you actually push it down to the next point. And we're always looking at, okay, it's not, we can serve 1,000 plus megawatts, no problem, if everything's working. But we have to be able to serve this load if transmission line's out of service or a transformer's out of service or something's out of service here. So every time you correct one of these things, you now put that bottleneck down a little bit further. So you got to then go look at that bottleneck and fix that. So now with the fact that we've closed breaker 392 and Northern Receiving Station, doesn't matter. But we now have a couple of PG&E lines between a receiving station behind Levi's Stadium and to receiving station that we have in Space Park Drive. It's two of our substations, but PG&E owns the transmission lines. They need to have bigger wires in those transmission lines. And so now there's a project in the that's moving forward on that. It's been through the California ISO and through PG&E. We're still arguing over at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission exactly how it's getting paid for, but they're going to move forward and get it done. So that should be moving forward this fall. Now, once we do that, now we've pushed the restriction down and we have to replace some transformers or increase the capacity of some transformers. And first in our Scott receiving station, and that's the one that bumps it to the 810 megawatts, the 870 megawatts, and then the restriction goes to Northern Receiving Station, and we got to increase the capacity there. So you can see how these projects there, and we will be including in our 5-year plan and our budgets those Scott Receiving Station projects and the Northern Receiving Station projects in our 5-year look in the capital budget. Now the thing is, once we have identified those, we can adjust the timing depending on what the load growth is doing. We want to have them done well ahead so we're not restricting it, but we can adjust the timing and the need in those. And there's probably in those projects there probably $70 million dollars worth of projects. And we'll talk a little bit about potential how we would look to fund those. Again, keeping the basic idea that it's the new load that's paying for this, not our existing customers. So this just shows you how these fit in on a timeline there. The first project up there is actually a South Loop expansion. That's a project that it's funded and it's underway. That is actually helps us move the power from the receiving stations out to where they're actually used, at the data centers. So that's that South Loop expansion. That's about a $17 million project there. Then we have the receiving station projects at Scott and Northern Receiving Station. Those are the ones that are really increasing that capacity coming in. But we also have to continue to maintain and take care of our aging infrastructure in the city too, so that we maintain the reliability to all our customers. So we have our Sarah substation replacement, and And that happens to be a station. That was the one that's located on Agilent property, where we were trying to get a larger footprint, from them. That didn't work out. They were kind of holding off on that. We are now looking to build that substation on the Jenny Strand property behind Jenny Strand Park. We own the property. We have the easements, back into that. So we have control over the timing and the construction of the project. So that one's moving forward now. And it's funded also. And then the next one in line would be our Homestead substation, which is behind Fire Station 3 near Kiley and Homestead there. There's a substation. And it's probably the next oldest substation. And again, we're just trying to keep up with this aging infrastructure so we don't end up with reliability problems, and even getting parts for circuit breakers and so on starts to become a problem. Then we get into the new substations for new development. And of course, Esperanza out there, the first phase of City Place, we can serve off our existing system. So that's why you see Esperanza pushed, back, a couple of years there, and it's fitting in the timing. The Parker substation is under construction by Vantage. That's in place. We're working on contract should be coming to council fairly soon for expansion of Fairview substation. And then right behind it, we have 2 more customer substations where we're talking to the customers that we can move forward. All of these, are growth. And again, the substations would be fully funded by the customers, in this place. So again, it falls back into that mode of they pay for, the cost of the service there. So just kind of broadening this a little bit, you talk about our changing customer relationship. And in a traditional relationship, in utilities, we generate the power at the power plants. We bring it in over the transmission and distribution lines, and we sell it to the residential and commercial and industrial customers. And that's kind of a traditional approach. But this goes back to strategic planning. Is the world's changing. It's going to be much more dynamic. All of a sudden you got electric vehicles in there. You got solar. You got storage. You got just all kinds of potential distributed generation and opportunities there. And you're going to see a lot more two-way transactions, in this. So as we're moving forward, so our customers are looking, for different things too. They're asking for more variety in our rate structures and looking at opportunities to potentially self-generate, but that requires standby charges, which we came to council on, earlier on. There's also time of use, question of when are they using the energy and what are we charging them, for that. Some of them want more renewables. Then there's electric vehicle charging, all kinds of, they're asking just for a variety of different, services and so on as things change here. So what we need to do is make sure that our rates, reflect those changes as we're going forward and providing the services. Right now, a fairly high cost or high proportion of our costs are actually kind of fixed. And as we go toward the future, that will probably likely remain. But our rates actually collect a lot of our revenue through the energy charge, the kilowatt hour charge. So, that's kind of a discrepancy between, the finances of the utility and how we charge the rates. Now, we have a lot of large customers using energy 24 hours a day, so we have a good solid revenue stream in there. But as things change and modify in the future, we've got to kind of fix that so that we are collecting the revenue in a manner that kind of reflects our costs so that we can stay financially, solid like we are, today. Now, what we're going to be doing, there's a couple of things coming forward to council and part of the fees schedule. We will be suggesting a system capacity fee for new load that will go on. It'll be probably about $85 or so. That will fund those new projects going forward. So the new load, again, is coming on. And will pay for those. And I don't think we're going to see any change in people who are willing to, come here. They want their data centers, in Silicon Valley. Now that may change as we go forward, but right now it's so we're proposing to do. The other thing that we'll probably come back to, and I've mentioned this before, would be later on is kind of that rate to structure design that would move more of our costs to fixed costs with a little bit lower energy rates, or demand costs for the industrial customers and a little bit lower energy rates, to match really our cost structure, better our rates to our cost structure. So we'll be coming, and then we'll have more discussions on those, as we go forward on that. Which brings it to kind of another ongoing effort here in our strategies as going forward. As you know, we have a very diverse resource portfolio here. And it's diverse in a lot of different ways. We have all kinds of fuel types, like wind and geothermal and hydro and solar and so on, all parts of our mix. It's also geographically diverse throughout California up into Washington. But it's also different ownership diversity too. Some of it we own, the city of Santa Clara owns, some of it's power purchase agreements, a lot of it is through joint powers agencies. So and all of that provides us some, basic, it helps us with the risk as we go forward as things change. Now, as you notice, we are out of the coal business as of January 1st. That's a good thing. Now, as we go forward, we're still under mandates to add more renewable power, and we're going to require to be by 2030 at 50% renewables. We're required to be 25 today. We're currently at 39% renewables. There is legislation out there targeting 100% out in 2015 as kind of an aspirational goal. And I got a slide that kind of shows this graphically next, but we are constantly looking for, we kind of open offers for renewable energy, as people and developers come forward. So we're constantly reviewing, potential power purchase agreements and contracts with firms. We've been looking and talking, negotiating with a developer doing a large wind project in New Mexico there, which actually sells its energy into the ISO grid, which makes it bucket one, or the highest level of renewable energy credits. And as is if it was in California. So we're looking at that. It's a very good price. We actually, the geographical diversity is good because the wind blows at different times throughout the nation in New Mexico versus California. So we actually get energy production when we need it here more. So that's a project that we will be probably bringing to council in the fairly near future. And of course, we are, with our residential use, we're serving it 100% carbon free. And we do that on an hourly basis. I mean, every hour of the day, we're bringing in a carbon-free energy that's more than enough to serve our residential customers here. Yeah, so that one didn't work out well. This graph was supposed to show the red line is going up there is the current RPS requirements. It's 25% now. It goes up to 33%, and then it climbs on up. The yellow line that goes further up toward 100%, that's potential legislation going forward. The blue line is where we are now, where we're at the 39%. You'll see it kind of go up and down a little bit. That's dependent on how contracts come online. They go down. Notice none of these lines are flat. That's because of the load growth that we have going on. And then the
Can I ask
shaded
you,
area.
is the brown line supposed to be the red line?
Yeah.
Yes,
that-
the brown
okay,
line.
I'm
yes,
just
yeah.
checking.
Yes,
Okay, thanks.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, And then the, uh, um, the new wind contract, that kind of shows you how that contract would sit in there and how it would bring us, up in our renewables, as we go forward. So the idea here is as we go forward, as opportunities come and good priced opportunities that that we believe are advantageous to us, then we can add to those renewables. Nice thing about being well above the requirements now is we can be really picky on contracts that we enter into. And we think that's very important to us as we go forward. So that's a contract that we'll be bringing forward, and we'll have more details, obviously, on that when we bring it forward, for approval. Which kind of brings us into another discussion here, which is a very good,
Space.
Space, that's right. It's to be, effective and efficient, as we're going forward and have good, work processes out there. It's important to have, good space. You have to have an environment, a good environment to do that in. Right now, the SVP, we've grown about 30% in the last, 10 years, or so. The city staff as a whole has grown, somewhat there too. Now, SVP has rented office space for over 20 years here. Right now I have 60 people located at 881 Martin Street, in a facility over there, and that splits our team, part, there. So that always makes it harder to collaborate and have good, business processes and so on there. So we're kind of we're split up there, and it becomes an issue, but we work through those. Now in 2007, council approved a budget item to look at a new utility building, the green building, and this was basically looking at the old police station location. So the idea was we're going to move forward, but there was a number of things came up, like a recession and other things that kind of delayed those discussions and that moving forward. But we had a couple $100,000 to take a look at that. We finally moved forward in 2015 to have do a feasibility study with that. And one of the first things we did was looked at the old police building and saying, is that inhabitable? Can you move there? Obviously, the police didn't want to be there. But we did take a good look at it. And that building, what it would take to bring it up to compliance, with codes, to deal with the hazardous materials and the seismic requirements in there, we're fine. Plus, it's not big enough to house the electric utility staff. So that kind of made that as a non-starter there. So we did that review. We then kind of expanded that review and said, well, you know what? We really need to see, what are the needs in City Hall complex. So we just kind of took that one step further. And again, Howlett Peterson Snyder did this work for us. We looked at the existing, Civic Center site. It's about 95,000 square feet, not including the old police building. And we're taking up probably 10, 12,000 of it, the SVP and the water utilities. Plus, we're leasing 33,000 square feet on 881 Martin. So we had them look 10 years out and say, what are the anticipated needs, space needs for the City Hall complex? And that's where it came up with 110,000 square feet plus 40 to 50 for SVP and the water and sewer, and that would depend on if we bring the control room in and some of the functions, what functions do you put in a building, like that. So that's kind of where the anticipated needs ended up. And that led us to in the budget process in 2016-17 to put in the preliminary design of or a building on the police site. And in that budget process, we also put in there one of the potential funding mechanisms was the sale of land. And one of those was Reed Street property, and the other one we wanted to talk about at least was the Loyalton property there. And so we still wanted to at least start that discussion with you and have start that dialogue with you. And as a potential as a potential alternative here. So looking at, what some of the advantages, of this, and this is just one potential alternative here. It would free up, some city hall space for other departments. If at some time in the future you wanted to phase, the construction, reconstruction of parts of City Hall, that give you some flexibility to do that. And again, it could be partially funded from the sale of land here. But there's a series of threshold questions that you really need to look at. One of those is the City Hall complex. Is this your long-term location for the City Hall? How do we engage the community in this discussion? And go through this discussion. And of course, not the least of which is, do we really want to sell, your property, and how would we, fund this going forward? So just kind of moving on to just talk briefly about the Loyalton property, because, we did, bring it up. We acquired the 1977, a little over 10,000 acres of property near Loyalton, California. It's just, it's north of Truckee, right on Highway 70, just west of 395. So up there, and it's broken into three pieces of property, actually. One's near the town of Loyalton. One, the main ranch property, is up, borders on Highway 70 there, and then there's a piece that's just kind of landlocked. It doesn't have any access to major roads, or public roads, there. So this property, we've originally bought it as a geothermal resource. There was a map, that the CEC put together and identified some geothermal potential there. Once we bought the property and start looking at it, best we could find is some lukewarm rocks. I mean, there just really wasn't a resource there. So we studied wind on it. We put anemometers up on the ridge lines and so on, and that didn't pan out either. Great average, but it was either like 60 miles an hour or zero, and windmills can't run in either one of those, wind speeds. It just was not a good, wind resource. So we've actually explored a lot of different, types of activities up there. We've everything from, gold mining to pheasant farms to, we've had just about everything that you could come up with has, been brought forward to us. But as a utility, and I come in there here as, from the utility standpoint, we haven't found a productive use, for this land. It is, 10,000 acres of land. The main farmhouse and property and buildings on it, we do need to probably take these down. They're a hazard. It probably costs us $250,000 to do that, to clear that hazard, but it's something that we need to do. We have used for grazing leases, and typically we get about $30,000 a year from grazing leases on this land. Currently, we do not have a grazing lease active, but we can go out and RFP and do that, again on the property. So that's kind of the situation we have. So it's been one of those properties. It's out there for us. We've worked for 40 years trying to find a good use for this property. Now, last time we had any appraisals, done on it was when we sold a little piece to the county. That was some of the prime property right off of, one of the highways, and that was in the $1,300 acre, type of value. So you're not talking $3 million an acre, you're probably talking $1,000 an acre for this. So you're probably talking $10 million on this property. So that's the situation with the Loyalton property, and that's the reason why we identified it for you as something to consider in potentially funding building. So what are our next steps here? We really think that we need to start working on some of these threshold questions. Is City Hall, is this the right location for the City Hall complex in the long run? How do we engage the community as we move forward here? What is selling property a proper way to fund this, or not? And that's a question that we put out there. And then you come down to and then even if we don't go forward with the building, I'd still pose the question, is this their value in keeping the Loyalton property? For me, it's been here ever since I've been here, so I'm kind of attached to it. But there's just really can't find a utility use for this property here. So that's kind of actually my presentation for today. I'm happy to answer any questions and any ideas on moving forward. So.
Okay, Councilmember O'Neill.
Thank you. So thank you, Director Rockema, for a really interesting presentation. And, there's a lot of very positives that you're conveying to the council and the public. And, and we have a lot of challenges, as you mentioned, the SB 100 and things going on. So it's going to be, as the traditional model shift, and as a lot of, particularly some of the customers around here look to doing their own generation, or whether it's fuel cells or their own off-site, either wind farms or solar or whatever. So we're always going to, we need to be kind of ahead of that curve. So so one thought that occurred to me, and in part, with we see with some of the other members of NCPA are doing, particularly now that our partners, our co-owners in the the wastewater treatment plant are now actually kind of clients of us through NCPA, the San Jose Clean Energy. And since some of the other clients of the wastewater plant, the tributary agencies, I guess, are also, many of them are members of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. And has there been any thought to trying to develop a community solar project or whatever on top of a lot of the areas of the wastewater treatment plant?
We've actually have talked about doing that. We actually worked with NCPA to explore that use. Now, with everything going on at San Jose and with them pulling their clean energy CCA together, we haven't gotten a lot of traction, going forward, with those discussions. Now that that's pulling together, it is an item that I was talking to NCPA staff, just a couple of weeks ago, saying it's time to readdress those questions, because there is a lot of space around the treatment plant. They've identified some of it for solar installations. Certainly as a 19% owner, whatever our percentage is, it would make sense that we would be a partner, in that project. So yeah, I think it's time to readdress that, and I think there's some opportunity there if we can get traction on it.
So, do you have any other thoughts about what we might be doing in terms of as we need to move to more carbon-free energy sources, or what are some of the other places that you mentioned the northern New Mexico wind project? Are there any other thoughts that you're looking at or ideas?
You know, most of the projects that we're looking at, you know, in coming into us that are coming in at very good prices are larger projects in California. Some of them are solar projects and large utility scale, multi, you know, 10, 20, 50 megawatt, you know, solar projects and so on tend to be getting to be very well priced. You know, so I think there's also opportunities, you know, within Santa Clara that we can look at, you know, partnering, you know, with our customers and so on too. So part of what we want to do, you know, in this, actually with the strategic planning process and with our integrated resource planning process that we're going through right now, is to look at those opportunities and then make sure that we're positioned and set up and have the processes so that we can pursue, you know, some of these. Like I say, sometimes you get so focused on just meeting the load and serving, you know, the load that you miss some of those opportunities. We'll make sure we are.
Because right, because you know the world is moving in a certain direction. Certainly around here, you know, the companies themselves are driving that. I mean, it's not just the state wanting it; it's that the companies want that, and our residents want that, and we know that that's the right thing to do. As we, you know, try to mitigate some of the impacts of ongoing climate change. So so do you have any thoughts? There's a lot of talk about storage and, you know, with all the solar, and we, you know, hear about how much we have overcapacity of solar, you know, during the day. And then, you know, do you see any real promise in, you know, having larger scale storage products so that you could store some of that solar energy to use it later in the, when the sun's not shining?
Right. You know, and actually, you know, that's beginning to be discussed more and more too. In fact, some of the solar developments we've talked to are now also starting to integrate storage in with their potential offers there. So we're starting to see that. We're also looking at, you know, whether or not we should be doing, you know, either a demonstration or some internal in-town storage there. I mean, there's cases right now, there's times when there's so much solar energy out there that a third of it has to be curtailed and just can't be used. There's times, a lot of times during when the sun's out there, that the prices actually go negative. They're paying people to take the energy, you know, from these things. So I think storage is a very important part of the market dynamics that as the technology advances, and, you know, you look at, you know, cars, I heard the term, you know, earlier today that, you know, car batteries, you know, the price, they see a 20% decline, you know, per year for the next few years, you know, in battery prices. So as these technologies change, we need to make sure that we're looking at and making sure we're making good choices, you know, as we go forward in these. And you also mentioned our customers and wanting your green energy. That did come out of our interviews with the customers. We had one of our groups was major industrial customers and a couple of developers. Another one was data centers and so on. Both of those, you know, have an interest in you know, green energy, you know, in different ways. They're clearly looking for reliability, and you know, is very extremely important to them. You know, still, you know, cost is important, but it's not quite the top, you know, in there. But it is, I think, why they're, you know, locating in Santa Clara. So there's a lot of dynamics, and a lot of them we're talking to customers about. You know, how do we procure renewables, you know, for them? How can we tie these? What kind of contracts can we put forward? So as we pull together, you know, some rate structures going forward, you may find that hopefully we'll find some good structures where we can start making some progress in these areas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Council Member Davis.
Thanks, John. I know you
Yes.
thought about this, and thanks for the New York thing. Barring that we will not have another like fiscal correction going forward, and things are going to look good for us, and you being a company that we kind of live with, and you are SVP, you're huge for us. We have not a lot of land here, as you know, and you have a space problem. So I was wondering, we're going to do probably more infill in construction and what's going to go down the pike on that one. So part of your plan is for us to partner together in land acquisition? Is that what you're kind of looking for? As far as, because one of your questions was, is City Hall complex going to remain on site? We don't know. We don't really know. But would it be probably better, instead of you're splitting into different spaces, that you're under one space with us? I mean, is that kind of like in your theory?
Well, yeah, you know, ideally, and to get a good collaboration and to have the most effective business processes, yeah, we would be co-located with, you know, the other city departments, you know, community development and public works and so on, because we do interact with them on daily, you know, basis, you know, finance department and so on. So being co-located in the same, you know, location with the rest of the city, I think does have a lot of advantages and synergies there. Now, that being, you know, said, you know, if that's not a workable solution, then having at least the SVP team together in a location,
Someplace.
yeah,
okay.
someplace, you know, would, you know, have positive advantages too. But it impacts that collaboration with other, you know, city departments. So, you know, it's a give and take. It's all a question of what is, you know, the best interests of the city as we go forward.
Well, my thinking is almost to partner with you on some kind of land acquisition, put everybody together under one house, because it will be more efficient. I mean, going forward, you know, and for the future of the city. The other thing you didn't kind of talk about was if there was like a natural disaster, how much of our resources would actually go offline? Because I was looking at your map. So if we had a natural, so we're on that Hayward Fault there. So if something happened, how would the city sustain something like that? What would the impact be for us?
You know, that's always a question, you know, in our minds, you know, too, is, you know, sustainability, resilience, you know, of the power grid and bringing it forward. Yeah, a lot of that factor has to do with the transmission system coming into Santa Clara. You know, how strong, how resilient is the PG&E transmission system? Because we have resources all over. If any one of those resources falls offline, we don't go dark.
Okay.
Where we just buy power from the market coming in. Usually what would cause us to go dark in a natural disaster like this would be, you know, earthquake on the Hayward Fault that interrupts transmission into the South Bay area. We'd have a tough time, you know, staying, you know, on board there and keeping the lights on. Yeah, Loma Prieta, turned out all the transmission lines stayed in place, all of our underground stayed in place and so on. What we lost was the distribution lines in the backyards, the little wires in the poles in the backyards slapped together. Once they slap together, they short circuit, they fault, and they burn down. So we had probably 20 locations spread out all over in backyards that we had to go find, you know, and it took us 2 days to get everybody back into service. The bigger facilities, you tend to design for, you know, earthquakes and, you know, to higher standards. You have your redundant sources and so on. So you try to build as much resiliency in as you can, you know, in that. But it's always part of our planning here.
Okay, I know, I think about that because I'm on the EOC.
Right.
I think about water, the lights go off, what's gonna happen, because people will panic. And, you know, if the lights are on and things are functioning, then less panic.
Right.
So, okay, that was another question. So how do you engage the community? I think I gave Navigant a bunch of my opinions on that one. And funding through Reed and Loyalton, I'm kind of, I don't want to sell Loyalton right now. I'm sorry, I know, you know that about me. We've had this discussion many times. And the reason being is that we need revenue streams, and I really need to exhaust every avenue that is on this property, and what can we do, or what, you know, going forward. And sustainability to me is more important, and you explained the geothermic, and we can't do the wind up there, but I'm just kind of wondering if there's another thing that we could do with that property, even though it's yours, and work with the city in collaboration and find something better instead of selling it. I mean, 10,000 acres is kind of nice.
I got to tell you, we've looked at everything from gold mining to lumber to gold mining to pheasant farms to wildlife refuges. We've had all kinds of, you know, ideas and thoughts, you know, coming in. And we've looked at a lot of different things, but
City manager.
I was going to suggest that that's the purpose of today's study session,
Okay.
is to hear about the strategic plan, the interest of council on whether to begin to develop the basic strategy for funding facilities, which obviously Silicon Valley Power has put forward. If there isn't an interest on the part of council to look at land sales, then we just need to move into other options and bring those forward so that council understands the trade-offs around if this, then that happens. And certainly what I think John has done well on is there is a need for facilities and centralization and improved workplace for advancing the strategic goals that will come forward. And they do need to coincide as we go forward so that we are thinking about the workplace and how to continue to sustain SVP services. So we're interested in those kind of comments from the council so that we better know how to begin to formulate funding strategies and our next steps as we continue to complete the strategic plan.
So that was I didn't want to give up loyalty right away, but I'm all for the RFP and put the cattle back out there again. Make some money. At least it's not sitting idle, but I mean, something that will, not a big revenue stream, but something and will feed the natural cows and everything will be cool. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Colstead?
Thanks, Mayor. On slide number 20, you talked about that we had 39% renewable energy now. But if large hydro was eligible, what would that punch you up to?
well, depending on how good the hydro year is, we could go up to 50 to 60% carbon-free, yeah.
So because the politicians decided that large hydro wasn't eligible renewable energy, you would have already met your 2030 goal.
Oh, sure, yes.
And
Absolutely.
that's something I think the council should be pretty proud of, that we're already at 50% renewable energy in this town, albeit not eligible because it's too big. Geez, there was something else I was going to talk to you about, but, oh, diversity. Your portfolio, the slide right above that, is so diverse that I was thinking about in an emergency, a natural disaster or something. That's critical. You know, when the sun's shining, the solar works. When the wind's blowing, the wind works. Geothermal works pretty much all the time. That assures a reliable source of energy for our citizens and our businesses. That's great planning on your guys' part. And one of the things that the city staff and the city council gets hit about with the new developments that are being proposed in our city, they want to know, have you planned for these new developments? Are you going to have enough electrons to turn on the lights? Are you going to have enough water for the people to drink? And after talking to you and some of the other staff, I'm absolutely certain that you guys have planned for the future and that all this development is going to be taken care of. There's going to be sewage treatment, there's going to be water, electricity, the works, and it's because of your hard work that we're getting that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Watanabe?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, John, for the great presentation. I have a couple of questions and a couple of statements. I'm glad you reminded me about Navigant. It seems like it was so long ago that we did that study. Oh, yeah, that's right. But I remember I met with them for about an hour and talked about different ideas and thoughts that I had. So I look forward to getting that report back from them after they get all the stakeholder input. And thank you for that information also about New York City and how we're much how much more power is in demand here. I mean, being from New York and working in the city for almost 10 years, I find that fascinating. What you mentioned, the substations, the planned, the new substations that are coming on. Are they built like where there are substations already, or are there pieces of land that have been identified to build the substations?
What we do as new customers come on, if they're big enough to require a substation, then we require them to locate it on their property. So they have to carve out a piece of their property and for the substation and build it, and then turn the control of that property or the title of that property over to us. And So it's on, so if a data center needs a substation, the substation's located on their property.
Great, okay, thank you. And then regarding the system capacity fee load, is this something that other power companies are doing? I mean, are we looking at, other opportunities, that other power companies are using for revenue streams and,
It is. I mean, there's several different mechanisms for funding these, and from a municipal utility standpoint, we don't want our other customers paying for this. Now, if you take an investor-owned utility, they very well could fund some of these improvements and then charge them and get a rate of return and charge all their customers on it, and not charge the same level of upfront fees. Sometimes they charge the first customer a higher charge and then refund pieces of it as additional customers coming on. But we found it's productive to take the approach that we are. It minimizes our risk and so on going forward.
I have no doubt. John, you're doing a great job with Silicon Valley Power. You mentioned Jenny Strand and some improvements over there. Now that's a public park, is it not?
Behind the park is about 4 acres of land that the utility purchased or was purchased with utility funds. So you'd be buffered by the park and Agilent there. So there is a Jenny Strand solar facility. I know if some of you are aware of that back there. We'd probably construct it in that location and relocate those solar panels. Right now, that property, some of the property past the solar part is actually being leased to Apple, and they're actually using it as a laydown area for part of the construction of their new headquarter building. So we're getting, some lease revenue.
They're not going to want to keep it, are they?
Oh, they'd love to keep it, but it's City of Santa Clara land.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great. Okay, and let me see. I think, well, regarding the Loyalton issue, just looking at the map that was provided, I know up around Reno and in that area, there is a lot of development going on right now. I don't see why it wouldn't be feasible just to, take a look and see what could potentially be done with the property. I mean, we're running out of land. In Santa Clara, and I mean, I understand your concern with wanting to keep, the whole Silicon Valley Power together. So, I mean, I would be personally, I'd be willing to, for the staff to look at potential uses for that land. So that's, if you're taking votes, that's mine. So,
Right.
so thank you very much, John. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Neill, and then I have comments after that.
Yeah, so on the, you probably have all heard me do my impression of Scarlett O'Hara's father when he's talking about Tara and the value of Tara, and there's, it's all about the land, Scarlett, so I'm not as wedded to Loyalton. I'm not as loyal to Loyalton. I mean, I know it's a very remote location, and, but maybe that'll be Santa Clara North or whatever. But one thought that I had heard, because I had heard something about in that area, like somebody trying to do biomass, so I don't know, it isn't, I heard, I don't know if you heard, I thought I heard that somebody was going to try to do a biomass plant near Loyalton or something that I had read. Just, if we can ever get people to agree that we need to take, the million dead trees out of the forest that we have.
Yeah, and that's part of the the issue there with biomass. Is the biomass plants are probably a little bit farther west into the more forested areas and where you have better interconnections into the PG&E grid. We're kind of hanging right out in the middle of no real transmission around us between Nevada's connection, which doesn't do us a lot of good, and PG&E's. Plus, it's not real heavily forested, a lot of biomass on it. It's a little more, grasslands and scrublands and so on, there.
Kind of the
So,
high desert.
yeah, it's a high desert, right? So, yeah,
That's why I was
that thing.
surprised when I heard something about Loyalton and,
Yeah.
yeah. But so that you provide a transition point for me. You mentioned about transmission, and I think one of the things, oftentimes the residents look at their rates and why is this high and why has this gone up? And, I think one of the things that is very high in California are the transmission charges, and it seems that, we are somewhat a little bit hostage, I guess, to PG&E since I guess they own most of the transmission capabilities. And do you see any alternatives to that, or what's your sense of that? Because that seems to be like where most of the cost is coming from, or the increases are in those transmission charges.
Right. A lot of the cost is in the transmission charges, and cost increases that we're seeing are in transmission charges, and also the transportation of natural gas, to our power plants. So, having generation, in town, and whether it's distributed at our customers and so on, does avoid that transmission costs, and that's part of the equation that we need to look at when we see those alternatives, come in. But it's you got to look at the whole economic picture, of it. How does it, impact the utility? How does it impact the customer, and so on? But certainly, transmission charges do make in-town generation, more cost effective.
So the last thing I'll bring up, and then I'll let the mayor talk, is I didn't hear all of it, but I was en route somewhere, and I was listening to Science Friday last Friday, and they had a segment on cybersecurity, and they talked about what happened in the Ukraine when a big area of the grid went down in the Ukraine, and how they had to send guys out, actually went out in trucks and manually restarted different plants and facilities, brought things back up online, and that there was actually kind of a movement to looking at going back to more of an analog control of some aspects of the grid rather than having it all be digital as an additional security. And they were talking about, and I want to go back and listen to it again, but Senator Angus King or whatever, he's got a bill that's coming up. So, I mean, I know that there's been various security assessments done, and this is always what you hear from from congressional hearings. What's your sense, or how are you feeling about the state of the security, say, for SVP's facilities?
I think we're well positioned there. Just as an interesting fact is that Ukraine incident happened in the November before we hosted the Super Bowl. So that was a huge topic, behind the scenes, on looking at our systems and so on, with all the governmental agencies and so on. They were on site and with us their time. And there is federal regulations. We've gone through audit with our critical infrastructure protection systems, which includes the cyber systems. And we're working our way through their recommendations on that. So I think we are fairly well set. Our operational systems are pretty separate from our administrative systems and so on, but that it's something that we got to continue to work with as we go forward.
Yeah, because I know they were making comments about how sometimes even with people having VPN access, and that they were talking about that people were using ways, and exactly as you said, unbeknownst to them, with their VPN access into an administrative function, and then kind of tunneling backwards into the operational pieces.
Right, and that's where and a lot of these actually federal requirements and so on looks at that separation of those systems. Those systems have to be in controlled areas with 6-sided boxes locked up, with card key control on them and limited access even by, city employees. And somebody leaves, you got to have them off the records in 24 hours, and all these requirements that we have to comply with to keep those systems secure.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Colstead, you want to speak again?
Yes, please, just briefly. First, I'd like to compliment Councilmember O'Neill on that brilliant impersonation of Thomas Mitchell. I seem to recall he played that part in 1939. I didn't know you were that conversant with his lines. But secondly, get back to the Loyalton issue. I take a little bit different look than some of my my partners up here. And maybe it's because I've been on this electricity committee for 15 years. Near as I can figure, we could probably net $7.5 or $8 million off of that piece of property. And if I look at that money, what it could earn in interest, it's substantially more than 30 grand a year for graze, to let a bunch of Hereford cattle graze on that land. I've been up there, I've looked around, talked to some realtors in the area, and what you said, Kathy, is absolutely spot on. There's development up there, and that's why they can fetch this price for that land, because there's potential. But as far as generating 1 kilowatt of electricity, I think that the staff has looked at it over and over for years, and there's just no profit in it for the city going forward. I would vote for selling that land, put the money in the Silicon Valley Power Fund for whatever plans they have going forward. Now is probably the definitive time to unload that parcel. It didn't pan out. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Director Rakama, for the report. I think it was excellent. And it's given us a lot to think about in terms of at least the physical plants of Silicon Valley Power and City Hall and some of the things that we need to look at. And I agree. I think that Silicon Valley Power should be on the same site or near City Hall in one location. I would like to have some information brought back as to what are we paying in rent for the facilities that we've been leasing for so long. I do remember we got a pretty decent lease arrangement when the office rents were really high. They were decent, but still, as a matter of fact, we're paying rent and other costs to lease property when we have this physical asset here. Redoing a city hall, and that is not a real popular thing when you're an elected official, but it's something that, and certainly the word, Taj Mahal can never come into it, but it's certainly something we have to look at, whether it's on this property or something else, because there's no secret that these buildings are obsolete and they're not efficient, and they're older, and our operations of our three, I'm going to call them our 3 large businesses here in the city, has grown tremendously over the years, and it certainly, we need to look at the efficiencies here of these buildings and having everything in one location. I think that once we determine exactly what we need and the finances that are associated with that, then we can start to look at making some of these other decisions. Like the Loyalton property, and I certainly wouldn't hire Councilmember Kolstad to sell this property because the value you gave was pretty low. I don't know where you got that, but even Director Rakama said we sold some land at $1,300 an acre, which would make it $13 million for this property, not $7 million. So we're not going to hire you if that's okay. I know that about, 6-7 months ago, it was on our agenda to hire a real estate person and to put it out for, I think, $10 million or something like that. And we pulled it off because we had never had a discussion about it. We didn't have, we weren't ready to go. We didn't even have an appraisal on the property. So I think we made the right decision by pulling that off. And, if we do that, we're going to do it the right way. And we're going to look at, what are there options, if any, because for me, selling property is a last resort. But if it's something that's going to be worthwhile for us at the right price, making sure that we're taking advantage of the market. And if there's another use, I had to look up the biomass that Teresa was talking about. So if we're looking at some other uses, is if there's options or not, but for me, that's a last resort. But, what will we actually need? I think to get to the point where we can make a decision as to combining City Hall and SVP together in one location, look at this location here. I think we need some options coming forward, and then the finances of what will it cost us, what are your specific needs. I know we're getting the report back and we have a general idea of what you need in terms of space, And then what will that cost? And then our sources of income for that. And Loyalton may indeed be one of those sources of income at the time. So I think we have a little bit of work to do, but I like the overall concept of putting everyone together, because you work with planning, you work with fire, you work with, everyone here at legal, here at City Hall. We should be in close proximity to each other. And I don't know, there's something that bothers me about a public agency such as the city or SVP paying rent somewhere else when we have our own, land assets. So I think we should really take an overall look at everything. But thank you very much for the report. It's long overdue, and we really need to dig into SVP. So thank you for everything that you've done on this.
Thank you. Thank you for your input.
Okay, so I have one member of the public, Mr. Jane, if you'd like to come forward.
So Director Rockema, I didn't hear that you had considered cold or hot fusion on the Loyalton property. I agree with Councilmember Kolstad wholeheartedly. My calculation was $30,000 of grazing fees would give you a 1.7% return on the original price of the property. And if it's $13 million, we're making far less than 1%. And since there's no transmission lines, it's not our core business. It's something that we should just get rid of and invest in something else. In terms of the City Hall complex, the SVP is an enterprise. They have the revenues to pay rent. And I think that they should continue to pay rent until we come up with a consolidated proposal for rebuilding City Hall along with SVP. Because as an enterprise, they have the source of revenue to pay that rent. I just finished reading the Climate Smart San Jose report, which was released this month, and San Jose is committed to encourage fuel switching. Their target is 47% of all homes will be all electric by 2030, and 100% of all homes will be all electric by 2050. I just installed a heat pump water heater, and so I'm very interested in taking advantage of demand response for heat pump water heaters to do some of the offloading of the duct curve. Other things that I encourage the city to consider is installing EV chargers at the schools, because teachers commute long distances and it's actually cheaper to have electric car to I encourage community solar, accelerating our LED streetlights program, feed-in tariffs. Other community choice energy programs have citizen advisory committees. We don't have one. And then I encourage that we do some inventories of our buildings around the city and do benchmarking. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see, are there any other speakers? Okay. All right, City Manager, do you have anything to conclude on this? All righty, so I think that concludes our meeting, and let's take a 10-minute break so we can start our Stadium Authority meeting at 7 p.m.